Now, Laura and Chris, you know that my day job is reporting on the politics on BBC Breakfast.
I do.
And I got a complaint from a viewer that I was wearing a disgusting brown tie one day.
Oh,
and now we've struck up a bit of a kind of like fashion friendship where I get advice from them. And I thought I could stage that now on this podcast. And the concerned viewer is Labour peer Lord Mendelson, who's here. Hello, Peter.
Well,
Hi, Adam.
Yes.
Just how bad was this tie to prompt you to want to text in, Peter? Blimey.
One thing Adam is not is a fashionista.
I'll be a journalista. I thought I'd get your advice because I've actually gone and got some new ties and I wanted to get
I want to see this horrendous
the
brand
Mendelson
number.
seal of approval. Right, so here's tie A. Laura, how would you describe that?
I would say this is a classic navy standard, not doing much for me. I think it might be rayon.
Bit
Mendelson?
boring.
Tory supporting tie.
Obviously, we
blue.
have no allegiances. It's just blue.
Okay.
The next one is red. It is red. It has a sort of corded appeal. It looks like it's trying to masquerade as being silk, but I'm not sure.
This is
a bit
great
wider at the
description,
bottom.
Laura.
Thanks.
What do you reckon about that one, Peter? Red?
Called masquerading as silk in red. Sounds very new Labour to me.
Yeah, that looks to me, that's sort of junior minister, New Labour era,
Okay.
about 1999.
Right, this one's really radical. This is like Mediterranean wedding tie.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this is skinny, floral, bit like something that might be on Lulu Little wallpaper. Navy background, sort of trying to give the impression of a Liberty print, but it's just not.
Have you worn that on the telly, Adam?
No, this is the extreme example to make the others look reasonable.
Look, I mean, did you have a hippie upbringing?
No.
I mean, all I do is warn you against broadcasting in that tie from an Indian restaurant, because you might find yourself merging into the wallpaper.
Yeah.
Well, as somebody who knows a lot about political communication, Adam, I think maybe you ought to listen.
Well, that's quite enough of Lord Mandelson's views on my clothes. Let's get his views on today's news on this edition of Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio, not wearing a tie because this is a podcast and you don't have to.
And it's Laura in the same studio, but we're still 2 meters apart. And I'm sorry that you didn't put the flowery one on.
And I'm Chris, down the corridor, tie-free in my socially distant boutique of news.
And we will hear from Lord Mendelson on lots of things in a minute. But first, we're going to hear from our media editor and also promising new presenter of the Today programme, Amal Rajan.
Showing potential.
Yeah, exactly. 3 rum and cokes down.
No cokes, I'm afraid. Yeah.
But actually, we probably shouldn't be laughing because there's quite a serious story today about the BBC. And there's been an edition of Panorama on BBC One tonight about another edition of Panorama. And it was that famous one from the 90s where Martin Bashir interviewed Princess Diana. And Amal, there's been a huge investigation by a retired judge into how the BBC actually got that interview.
Yes, and it's devastating in its indictment of the BBC as an institution, and of some of the individuals involved. Just for a bit of context, you mentioned the famous, the notorious Martin Bashir interview with Princess Diana in 1995. This is the one where she said there were 3 people in the marriage, and therefore it was a bit crowded. We've known for some time that that interview was obtained after some fake bank statements, which Martin Bashir asked a graphic designer to mock up, were shown to Earl Spencer, Charles Spencer, who's Princess Diana's brother, as a way of kind of gaining his trust and gaining a sort of access to Princess Diana. But this story kind of kicked off in quite a big way around the time. There was a BBC investigation in the 1990s, which essentially cleared Bashir of any wrongdoing. And coming up to the 25th anniversary, a lot of people looked into it again and said, hang on a second, something's missing here, big time. And anyway, there was a bit of a hoo-ha last year. Lord Dyson, a former Master of the Rolls, was appointed by the current Director General, Tim Davie, to look into it. And he has issued a very, very thorough report. And in that report, he essentially says 3 big, very bad things about the BBC. The first is he accuses Martin Bashir of repeated lying. He says he deceived colleagues, he deceived sources. On the second level, which is the investigation which Tony Hall, Lord Hall, who was then the Director of News and later a Director General, the investigation that he did into how that panorama was secured, he basically says was woefully ineffective. And he says that Tony Hall was wrong not, for instance, to interview Earl Spencer. And then he says something which is even more explosive. He doesn't use the phrase cover up. He says the BBC there was a process of covering up, i.e. the BBC as an institution deceived large numbers of people in the public about what it knew about that whole saga. So this is the Director General today has said this is a dark day for the BBC. I think that's probably an understatement.
And we'll hear what some of the players have had to say about this report. But first, here is what Earl Spencer, Diana's brother, told Panorama about what he thinks the impact of all of this might have been on how history played out.
Well, the irony is that I met Martin Bashir on the 31st of August, 1995, because exactly 2 years later she died. And I do draw a line between the two events.
Now, Amal, Martin Bashir has resigned from the BBC on ill health grounds. What's he been saying today? Because he's released a statement, hasn't he?
Martin Bashir has released a statement, and he says once again that he accepts that he was wrong. He says it was a stupid mistake to ask for these bank statements to be mocked up, as he put it. But he also strongly reasserts that Princess Diana would have given him this interview anyway. This is a really central point that he says, had it not been for these bank statements, she was still in a place where she wanted to speak to the BBC. And he also says that, he's proud of that interview, and he says that he's proud of the fact that she addressed issues around mental health in particular. I mean, people forget if they go back and watch it, there was an awful lot about things like bulimia and sort of really dark stuff about mental health at a time when not many people were talking about it. And so Martin Bashir has reiterated that he's proud of that, the contribution that interview made to public life.
And I suppose the thing is, a lot of this, whether it's Earl Spencer reflecting on everything that happened or Martin Bashir reflecting on everything that happened, there is no way of knowing what would have happened in a parallel universe, despite all of the speculation and chatter that will undoubtedly be about this is a very, significant story. But I suppose what is also hard to tell is what the impact really will be on the BBC. It's always a bit strange talking about the BBC when we're sitting in the BBC. But, there is obviously, there's immediately a lot of, this is appalling. I think Lord Burt has said it's a stain on the BBC, who was Director General at the time, and all of that. But it is yet such a very long time ago. So I don't know, Amal, I don't know how sure you feel we can be about what the impact will be, because it's a long, long time ago. And it's also not the first time concerns about this interview have been raised. It's been covered off and on for a long time too.
I think you're spot on, as ever, Laura. I think the one thing that I'd say slightly, that's a key pillar of the BBC's defence, that, lessons have been learnt from 25 years ago. The one thing that I think slightly weakens that defence is the fact that Martin Bashir was rehired when Tony Hall was Director General of the BBC. He was rehired as a religious affairs correspondent in 2016, which shows that Tony Hall, who conducted that original investigation, I think he would now say it was a mistake. There's certainly a consensus that the rehiring of Martin Bashir was a mistake. But the fact is, he was rehired only 5 years ago. And the truth is, as you know better than anyone, in this, as we all know as journalists these days who work for the BBC, in the slaughterhouse that is modern social media, this is going to lead to days and days of very bad headlines, damaging memes, and, social media is where nuance goes to die. And some people might lose the fact that this is historic. Some people, I think, will, fail to understand this is something from a previous regime. So I think it will have a damage on the BBC's reputation.
Well, Amal, thank you for bringing us all the nuances of that very complicated story. And you need to get to bed, probably, because you're an early riser now.
Mate, I'm on a day off tomorrow, so I'll be drinking rum tonight as well.
I didn't realise you did day off.
It's a partial day off. I think I'm doing a bit of, who knows. Thanks for having me on, guys. See you soon.
Great to have you on.
Cheers.
Take care.
Cheers.
And actually, you know what? While we're talking about this interview, I've just got such strong memories of when it was broadcast.
Me too.
And let's have a little listen to one of the really famous bits.
Do you think you'll ever be Queen?
No, I don't. No.
Why do you think that?
I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts, in people's hearts. But I don't see myself being queen of this country.
Peter, do you remember what it was like actually seeing that interview at the time? And did anyone give any thought about how the interview had actually been obtained and what was going on behind the scenes in the run-up to it?
No, nobody went through the mechanics in that way. It was jaw-dropping. It was also upsetting. You felt that Princess Diana had gone through a really really heartrending period of her life. There was something very authentic about it. I have to say, much more authentic than I found the Meghan Markle interview more recently. I mean, I think the BBC has been absolutely right to fess up to this. I mean, it is a terrible blot on the BBC's copybook, as Lord Burt, the then Director General, has very honestly said. The truth is that the interview was obtained on a fraudulent basis. It deliberately, Diana's sense of paranoia, her sense of isolation, including from her staff and her personal protection officer, that was deliberately fed or manipulated in order to get that interview. And you just have to ask yourself, if that hadn't been the case and if the interview hadn't taken place, then perhaps history would have been different. I mean, perhaps if she hadn't been quite so isolated from her staff and her security people, she wouldn't have been in Paris so unprotected and so exposed to those human elements. I just ask the question, that's all.
Yeah. Well, that was you in the 90s. Let's talk about you in the noughties when you were a European Trade Commissioner in Brussels doing trade deals, which is something we're actually all talking about this week because there's been, Laura, a bit of a rift in the cabinet over the UK's negotiating position for the upcoming trade deal with Australia. Just set out what the different factions are and what the row is about.
Okay, well, in one corner, you've got George Eustace, who should be friend of the farmer, friend of the fisherman. He's the Secretary of State for the Environment and Rural Affairs. He wants there to be a trade deal with Australia, but he wants there to be a trade deal with Australia with quite a lot of conditions attached. So to protect small farmers in the UK from the brute force of Aussie farmers flooding the country with cheap exports. That's the fear. In the other corner, you've got Liz Truss, the Secretary of State for International Trade. She is desperate to do a trade deal with Australia and wants it to be a kind of no-holds-barred, let's go free trade buccaneering at the top of the list. In the middle, there's quite a lot of people trying to find a consensus between the two, but it is tricky and it's awkward and it's relevant in a bigger way for two reasons. One, because this would be the first trade deal the UK does that's not just a rollover from the kind we used to have when we were in the EU. And second of all, of course, this is being seen as a proxy for the kind of relationship the UK wants with the rest of the world in our globally British post-Brexit future.
And Peter, this is just the sort of thing you've got to get used to if you've got an independent trade policy, isn't it? Trade-offs here, who do you annoy there, and to get a good deal somewhere else.
It's par for the course. I'm very familiar with these trade-offs and these blows. Everything, of course, at this stage is completely exaggerated and overblown because when it comes to it, when it's finally agreed, the actual ambition and standard of the entire thing will be much lower than anyone is talking about now. I don't believe that, Australian food imports are going to swamp our markets. But it does say something about the politics of trade in food. And I think that if this sort of anxiety is being created over Australian lamb, you wait till we get back to American chlorinated chicken and hormone-injected beef, then everyone will really start taking off all over again. You've seen nothing yet.
Where do you think the compromise should lie on this prospective Australian deal? Where would you fall down on which side of the argument?
I know where it's going to fall down.
Go on then.
Oh,
It will fall down on the side of George Eustace. It will fall down on the side of every agricultural trade deal that I've ever seen or negotiated. And that is that tariff elimination, which one side of the argument will make, great hay of and shout from the rooftops about, will then be caveated by quotas and by the whole thing being introduced over very many years. And that's how it always is with agriculture, because they are very, very sensitive sectors for all concerned. The problem for Britain is that, by and large, our trade is already open to the rest of the world. the only part of our economy that isn't is agriculture. It's the only really seriously protected area that we have to unprotect and therefore offer to the rest of the world in order to get benefits and trade opportunities and openings back in return. And I'm afraid that agriculture is going to be continuously exposed in each and every successive trade negotiation, whether it be with Australia, as we're doing, the United States or Brazil, anywhere where there are big agricultural exporters, we are going to come on the receiving end of very tough and offensive demands made against our farm sector.
And you mean offensive as in it's something that we're asking for from our people we're negotiating, not offensive as in like, how dare you? It's offensive as in it's something we want.
Or like in American football. I mean, this is the
We're defensive over agriculture. We are offensive chiefly on services. And if you fall over yourself and you're so keen to sort of show how good you are and how quick you can achieve these negotiations, you are in danger of sacrificing the goals and targets that you've established for yourselves because you're so keen to show off politically. Because to realize those goals, those offensive targets, it requires more negotiation. It requires patience. It requires detail. It requires being prepared to walk away from a negotiation if you're not getting what you want, rather than just throwing everything in a mad great hurry in order to produce something, to wave around at the G20 meeting.
Well, that you're surely not suggesting what cabinet ministers want is a grip and grin handshake moment when Australia comes to the G7 in Cornwall. How sceptical of you, Lord Mendelson. We'll have to see if your prediction comes true.
Right, let's stick to our timetable now, because we're going to talk about trains now, because if you're a fan of Thomas the Tank Engine, you will understand this reference from the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, as he was introducing his new idea for bringing all the railways in England together so that for the customers it makes much more sense, with a new body not called British Rail but called Great British Railways, so nearly the same.
By bringing the timetabling and the ticketing and the network together sort of effectively under one roof, it does mean that you do know who is responsible. When things go wrong, there's a single guiding mind, or as the media often say, a sort of fat controller running the network.
No reference to Annie and Clarabelle. That's the great shame for me, I think.
I think he means body positive controller. Chris, you're getting on trains a lot now because Any Questions is back out on the road. I get the impression, actually, this blueprint for the railways could eventually mean that things do feel a bit different when it comes to tickets and scanning your phone at the gate and who you speak to if you want a refund.
I'm on trains a lot more, but not half as much as I end up watching Thomas the Tank Engine with my little ones. Let me tell you, I could run through the entire biographical cast list, but I won't. But yeah, you're right, aren't you? It is quite a change coming, given that I guess one of the big criticisms of the privatisation era was one of fragmentation, that you were splitting up who was responsible for the track and the signalling from the people who ran the trains, and then all of that complexity that you get as a punter. You can only get on this train if it's run by this company, and this one only after a particular time, and all of that. I guess the case that's being made is trying to make the most of keeping an element of privatisation, but bringing a lot of the rest of it under that single new organisation with that almost retro name.
And Peter, is this another example of the modern day Boris Johnson Conservatives doing something that you'd maybe expect a Labour government to do, which is to take more of the railways into something that looks like public ownership, even though commercial companies are still going to be massively involved?
Yeah, he is a completely unprincipled individual who has no sense of conviction whatsoever, no moral compass, and no.
Say what you really mean.
No, but if he's doing something that's right, what's wrong with that?
I didn't say it was wrong. I'm just saying that he would go off in any direction in order to chase votes, get support. That's what he is. I mean, he doesn't. He's not as.
Isn't that what New Labour did for 13 years?
Great sort of policy compass, is he? He's not sort of rooted in great sort of beliefs, or he has no political philosophy. I mean, he just wants to do what he feels like doing. On this occasion, by the law of averages, of course, he will turn out sometimes to be right.
Do you think back to those Labour years and think actually we should have done something more about the railways, something more radical, and actually we wouldn't be in the position that we're in now, where people find it a bit confusing and the tickets are expensive?
I don't remember the railways during the last Labour government being a colossal failure. I don't remember the system breaking down. Perhaps it was too early to foresee what needed to be changed, what needed to be further reformed. I don't think we made I must say, I don't think we made a huge priority and a great fist of transport policy under the last Labour government. I think it was a bit of a lacuna, a bit of a sort of deep black hole for us.
Now, Laura, talking about Labour, why were lots of people in the Westminster Village watching a clip of Penny Mordaunt, the Paymaster General, which is a fancy name for her ministerial job, having a go at Angela Raynor, Labour's deputy leader?
Well, cast your mind back 7 days, and we were just sort of at the end of a very vigorous few days of interviews being given by Angela Raynor, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, after a pretty brutal briefing war between her and Sir Keir Starmer in the wake of Labour's not very good election results. At the end of which she came out with lots and lots and lots of new jobs, one of which has given her a more front-facing role in theory, in public and in the Commons. And this was her first big outing where she really wanted to sock it to the Tories, but
she had it socked back at her because she was making all these claims about dodgy donations to the Conservatives and so-called crony contracts and sleaze. And Penny Mordaunt kind of turned the tables a bit.
If you were to take every single MP she's made an allegation about this afternoon, and you were to look at all of the political donations they have received since the pandemic started, since January 2020, if you were to add them all up, if you were to double them, no, Mr. Speaker, if you were to quadruple them, you would still just about match what the Honourable Lady herself has received in the same time period.
Now, Peter, is that Raynor mania, as I'm calling the last few weeks? Is that it over? Has it hit the buffers? She's not the future now?
All I know is that the Labour Party, if it's going to win the next general election, needs to transform its organisation, its skill base, its campaigning, its communications. Angela, I think, is much better in a public-facing role, dealing with policy, frankly, than she was dropped into the bowels of the Labour Party head office and expected to sort out, the machinery and the campaigning and the organisation of the Labour Party. It needs a complete overhaul, and I'm sure that is now become Keir Starmer's priority, and I'm sure Annalise Dodds, as the chair, will oversee it for him. The truth is that the Labour Party's whole campaign organisation has been completely run down under Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, people of real quality, their skills have been thrown to the winds. I mean, we've got staff there in the party head office and elsewhere who are frankly underqualified, unmotivated. They were put there because they were cronies of Jeremy Corbyn. And these are not people who you can transform by giving more support to. I think the staffing needs changing. We need completely to overhaul just about everything, really. Our organisation, the way in which we've been selecting our candidates, our funding base, our communications, what we do with social media, the whole thing needs a complete reconstruction.
Could you, right now, tell us what voters believe or should believe is Keir Starmer's one central idea? If you could sum it up in a one-pager or in a sentence, in the way that we all know lots of people consume politics in sort of only the briefest of glimpses, what would you say it was?
Well, it's for him to do, not me. I mean, he speaks on his own behalf. I don't speak for him.
But could you, as a senior Labour figure, could you tell us what you think it is? Because if you can't, isn't that actually the very problem?
To me, Laura, it's about freedom. I mean, not the freedom that comes from being self-reliant or self-made. It is the freedom that comes from a strong society, a state that creates a platform on which everyone can stand and grow tall and fulfill their potential. And when they need to be protected, yes, the state should be there to do that with them and for them. So it is about freedom to me in politics.
The next big electoral challenge for Keir Starmer will probably be the Batley and Spen by-election. Diane Abbott gave a quote to The Guardian this week saying, Keir Starmer faces another by-election in the coming months in Batley and Spen. If Labour loses again, it must surely be curtains for him. Do you agree with Diane Abbott? I'm guessing not, but it is a bit of a test for Keir, isn't it?
Of course it's a test. Everything's a test. Every day he gets up in the morning, he's being tested. Look, what I like about and support in Keir Starmer's leadership is that he knows that if we're going to transform the country, we first have to transform ourselves, our policies, and our ideas. And that without that change, we are not going to be in any fit state to fight and win the next general election. What I would say about Keir, though, he needs allies. He needs to recruit soldiers. He needs an army to help him drive through that change in the party. Because we know that the people who want to drag their feet or are yet to be persuaded or want to block change, frankly, are greater in number. They're certainly more vocal and determined than those people who are prepared to put their heads up above the parapet, take the bullets for him and with him in order to bring about that necessary change. You know, that's in the nature of politics. Mm-hmm. I think the problem, in a sense, that he has is that when he was elected as leader of the Labour Party, he gave the impression that, you know, he wanted to replace Corbyn, change the face at the top, without rethinking our policies, and that people could vote for him as a replacement for Corbyn, but continue with the same policies. Now, I don't know whether people did get that impression or not, or how many people got that impression, but I think the impression was created. And I think he now realizes that, that's not going to win us the next election.
Is Keir Starmer a good politician? Is he good enough at the craft of politics?
I think that he has the right instincts as a politician. I think he's somebody who is decent. He has strong values. I think he's somebody who I would characterize as being on the left of the party, but I think he's pragmatic in his approach, and I think he has a very modern outlook as a politician.
It's not a yes, though, is it?
As I've already said, he needs more support. I think too many people thought that when he became leader that all we needed to do was minus Corbyn and we just needed one more heave and that would be it. They weren't right then and they're even less right now.
Lord Mendelson, do you ever fear there might not be another Labour government in your lifetime?
I get up every day absolutely determined to make sure that there is.
So and do you feel that you've now become a bit of a bête noire? Because actually I've noticed every statement that we get from the Socialist Campaign Group has your name in it, as if you're to blame for all the problems.
I've always been to blame. I've always been the scapegoat. Where have you been, Adam? I know you're young, but you're not that. You don't remember the 1980s when I was communications and campaign director for Neil Kinnock? I was being blamed then. Do you not remember when I was preparing and organising the election campaign in 1997 and I became the Prince of Darkness? It was ever thus.
We've said on this podcast on many occasions, there sometimes is nothing quite so useful for a leader as a controversial sidekick who can absorb the blame and opprobrium from time to time. That said, we are delighted that you've given us your time this evening.
Thank you for being our sidekick.
Great to have you on Newscast.
It's a thought. Thank you, Lord Mendelson. And I guess that's your lot from us, lot. Have we petered out? Is that it?
Oh, blimey. Definitely time to go now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Newscast from the BBC.